It was late October 2014. I was 26 back then, living in a small town in northern Illinois. I remember that week being unusually quiet, the kind where the cold starts creeping into your bones before winter even arrives. I had taken a few days off work, mostly to get away from everything for a bit. My head was full, life was dull, and I needed something different. Something that would shake off the stillness that had built up inside me. I'd done plenty of camping before, but that weekend I picked a place I shouldn't have. The old Maple Hill Cemetery, a few miles outside town. It wasn't one of those fancy, well-kept cemeteries. It was old, abandoned, really out past a stretch of farmland and a few crumbling barns. Locals said no one had been buried there for decades. There was a rusted gate, half fallen over, and a narrow dirt path leading up a hill surrounded by leafless trees. I'd driven past it before and always wondered what it looked like inside. I don't know what made me think camping there was a good idea. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was boredom. Whatever it was, I packed my small green tent, a sleeping bag, a flashlight, a folding chair, and enough food for one night. The air was heavy when I got there, and the sky had that thick, gray look it gets before rain. The ground was covered in old leaves, damp and soft under my boots. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, rows of crooked headstones stretched out in uneven lines, some toppled, some cracked, all faded beyond reading. A few names still showed faintly when I brushed off the dirt, but most were just stone and time. I picked a flat spot near the center, next to a big oak that had grown through part of a broken grave. I set up my tent there. The sound of the wind through the trees was constant, low, uneven, carrying that hollow whistle that comes when the branches are bare. Somewhere in the distance, a crow kept calling. The place felt forgotten, but not empty. It's strange how quiet can make a place feel full. By the time the sun started to drop, I had a small fire going. The flames flickered against the headstones, throwing orange light on the names that were still visible. I ate from a can of chili and watched the light fade out of the sky. The cold came fast. It wasn't the sharp kind that stings your fingers. It was the slow kind that creeps through your clothes, making your breath visible in the air. I wrapped myself tighter in my jacket and stared into the fire until it burned low. At around 9, I heard it for the first time, a crunching sound. Not constant, not close, just one slow step somewhere behind me. I froze, listening. The wind had died down completely, so the sound carried clearly. I turned my flashlight toward the noise, but the beam only showed trees and stone. I told myself it was probably an animal. Raccoons, maybe. But after a few minutes, I heard it again, this time to my right. A single, heavy step on dry leaves. Then nothing. I tried to shake it off, told myself to relax. I even kicked some dirt over the fire and crawled into my tent early, figuring I'd sleep it off. The ground was uneven, and the smell of damp soil mixed with something faintly metallic, like rust or old blood. I zipped up the tent and laid still, listening. For a while, it was quiet again, just the sound of my own breathing. Then, sometime around midnight, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. It was pitch dark inside the tent. My watch said 12:47 a.m. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow and dragging, moving just outside my tent. They weren't quick like an animal's. Each step sounded deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch. The kind of sound a person makes when they're trying not to be noticed. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. My flashlight was beside me, but I didn't move. I just listened. Whoever or whatever, it was stopped near the back of the tent. I could hear breathing, not loud, but steady, like someone standing still, facing me. The seconds dragged. I thought maybe it was someone messing with me. Maybe a farmer saw my fire earlier and decided to scare me off. I reached for the flashlight as quietly as I could and clicked it on. The beam shone through the thin tent fabric, lighting up the outline of the trees. Nothing moved, no shadow, no shape. Then something touched the back of the tent. Just a soft brush, like a hand dragging slowly down the nylon. I bolted upright, unzipped the flap, and shone the light outside. The beam cut across the graves and tree trunks. Nothing, just silence and fog starting to rise off the ground. I got out of the tent completely, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. I swept the light around again. Still nothing. But the ground behind the tent was disturbed. I saw prints, muddy, deep, and clearly human. They led away from the tent, disappearing between the graves toward the far side of the cemetery. I stood there for a long time just listening. The fog thickened, and everything felt muffled. I didn't want to chase whatever it was, but I didn't want to stay either. My truck was about a 5-minute walk down the path, parked near the gate. I decided I'd pack up and leave right then. I started taking down the tent, moving fast but trying not to make noise. Every snap of a pole or zip of fabric sounded too loud. When I was almost done, I heard a noise again, this time from the direction of my truck. It was faint but unmistakable, the sound of metal creaking, like a door hinge. My chest tightened. I turned off the flashlight and waited. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was my truck door. Someone was opening it. I didn't move for a few seconds. Then I slowly started walking toward the gate, crouched low, staying close to the trees. The fog made it hard to see more than a few yards ahead, but I could make out the shape of my truck under the dim light of the moon. The driver's door was wide open. I stopped about 20 feet away, hiding behind a headstone. I listened again, nothing but wind. I waited maybe a full minute before stepping closer, holding my flashlight tight like a weapon. I swung the beam inside the truck. The seats were empty, but the glove box was open, papers scattered across the seat. My backpack, which had been in the passenger side, was gone. I felt my stomach drop. Whoever had been there must have seen my fire earlier, waited until I was asleep, and tried to sneak up. Maybe they got scared when I woke up, or maybe they just went through my stuff and left. But there were no other cars around. No lights, nothing but dark woods and fog. I didn't even finish packing. I threw what I had into the back seat, jumped in, and locked the doors. When I started the engine, the headlights cut through the fog, and for a second I thought I saw something move at the edge of the trees, a shadow slipping behind one of the larger stones. But I didn't wait to check. I slammed the truck into gear and drove until I hit the main road, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I finally got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it all in my head. The steps, the breathing, the hand on the tent, the prints in the mud. The next morning, I drove back with a friend. It was daylight then, clear and cold. We found the tent still half collapsed, the fire pit wet from the dew. My friend walked around a bit while I checked the area. There were more footprints than before. Deep, barefoot ones this time, all around where I'd camped. Some circled the tent. Some led toward the gate but stopped halfway, as if whoever it was had walked in circles through the night. My backpack was lying under the oak, ripped open, my food gone. We left after that. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? That someone barefoot stalked me through an old cemetery at midnight? Maybe it was some drifter living nearby, maybe just some crazy person passing through. But I've never gone camping alone again. Sometimes, when it rains and the wind hits the house just right, I hear that same dragging sound outside my window, just once or twice, soft enough that I almost doubt it. But every time, I remember that night. The fog, the prints, the slow breathing just outside the tent, and I turn on every damn light in the house until morning. I went camping deep in the Amazon rainforest once, and I still don't know what exactly happened that night. It's been years now, but I can still smell that wet soil and the thick, heavy air pressing down on my chest. It was supposed to be a quiet solo trip, something I'd planned for months. I was 28 then, obsessed with being alone in nature. I'd already done mountains, deserts, and coastal trails. The Amazon felt like the next step, a challenge. I wanted to push myself to see if I could handle the isolation and the wildness of it. It was the summer of 2018, and I flew into Manaus, Brazil, then took a small boat down the Rio Negro with a guide for a day. The guide left me near a narrow inlet that curved into the forest. I had a GPS, a satellite phone, a small tent, food for 5 days, and a machete strapped to my side. The guide said he'd be back at the same spot to pick me up in 5 days. I remember watching the boat fade into the river mist until the sound of the motor disappeared. After that, it was just the jungle and me. The first 2 days were fine. I set up my tent near a small clearing close to the water. The humidity was unbearable, and everything smelled like wet wood and rot. I could hear insects and birds constantly. The nights were loud. Frogs croaking, distant howls of monkeys, the rustle of leaves that never seemed to stop. I got used to it. I even liked it at first. On the third day, I decided to hike deeper into the forest just to see what was around. The ground was soft, muddy in places, covered in roots that twisted like veins under my boots. The air was heavy and made it hard to breathe sometimes. I carried a small backpack with water, some food, and my machete. I marked the trees with small cuts as I went so I could find my way back. I didn't go far, maybe 2 miles in, but the forest felt endless. Everything looked the same, and I realized how easy it would be to get lost if I didn't keep track. Around late afternoon, I came across something that didn't look natural. It was a small, half-rotted wooden structure, more like a shack than a cabin. The roof had caved in on one side, and vines had grown over the walls. I guessed it was maybe 50 or 60 years old, maybe used by hunters or loggers a long time ago. I looked around, stepped closer, and noticed old tools on the ground. Rusted machetes, an axe head, a broken lantern. There was a smell coming from inside, faint but sour, like mold and something else I couldn't name. I peeked in through the broken wall. Inside, there were a few wooden crates and what looked like an old metal bed frame. Everything was covered in layers of dirt and leaves. I didn't go inside. I just stood there for a while, staring at it. Something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was just the silence around it. The jungle noise seemed to die down near that spot. I decided to head back to my camp before dark. When I got back, the sky was gray, and it looked like rain was coming. I cooked some instant noodles over my small camping stove and sat there listening to the forest. It started raining around 8 p.m. A hard, steady downpour that made everything vibrate with sound. I zipped myself inside the tent, trying to stay dry, but I could feel the dampness creeping in. The ground underneath me was soft, and I could feel water pooling. Somewhere after midnight, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The rain had slowed down, but I could still hear it dripping from the trees. Then I realized it was dead quiet. No frogs, no insects, nothing. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing against your ears. I lay there listening, trying to figure out if it was just my imagination. Then I heard it, a slow, crunching sound, like someone stepping on wet leaves. It was close, maybe 20 feet away. I stayed perfectly still. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached slowly for my flashlight, trying not to make noise. I clicked it on and pointed it toward the sound through the thin tent fabric. For a moment, I thought I saw something, just movement, like a shadow shifting. Then nothing. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a tapir or a wild pig. I waited. A few minutes passed. Then I heard it again, closer this time. The sound of something brushing against the tent wall, near my feet. I froze. The shape pressed lightly against the fabric. Tall, narrow, upright. It wasn't an animal. I held my breath and didn't move an inch. After a few seconds, the pressure disappeared, and I heard slow footsteps moving away. I stayed awake the whole night, not daring to move. Around dawn, I unzipped the tent and looked outside. The ground was covered in tracks from the rain, but near the tent, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Footprints. Human footprints. Barefoot. They weren't mine. I had been wearing boots the whole time. They circled my tent once, then led off into the trees toward the direction of the shack I had found the day before. I packed up everything in a rush. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped things. I wanted to leave immediately, but I still had 2 days before the guide was supposed to come back. I thought about heading to the river early and waiting there. I started walking fast through the forest, following the markings I had made on the trees. The jungle felt different that morning, quieter, heavier, like the air itself was watching me. When I passed near the area where the shack was, I couldn't help but glance toward it. From a distance, I saw smoke. Thin, gray smoke rising straight up from behind the trees. Someone was there. My heart started racing. I didn't go closer. I turned and moved as quietly as I could in the other direction. Every few minutes, I stopped to listen. I kept thinking I heard footsteps behind me, faint but there. I told myself it was just my nerves, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. By noon, I reached the riverbank where the guide was supposed to pick me up in 2 days. I decided to stay there instead of returning to my old camp. The area was open, and I could see both sides of the river. I felt safer, though not by much. I set up my tent again and tried to calm myself, but I couldn't stop checking the tree-line. Every sound made me jump. That night, I built a small fire and kept it burning the entire time. I sat beside it, holding my machete, waiting for morning. Around 2 a.m., I heard something again. Branches snapping, faint movement near the trees. My flashlight's beam caught nothing but leaves and rain, but I knew something or someone was there. I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning came, I was pale, exhausted, and on edge. I stayed put. The second night was the same. Constant watching, every sound making my heart jump. At one point, I swore I saw movement across the river, but the fog made it impossible to tell. When the boat finally arrived the next day, I didn't wait for it to dock properly. I ran into the shallow water, threw my gear in, and got on board. I didn't say anything. I just sat there staring back at the forest as it faded away behind me. Even now, I don't know who or what that was. Maybe someone living out there, maybe someone who didn't want to be found. The Amazon is full of stories about people who disappear into the forest and never come back. People who live off the land, hidden from everyone. I didn't want to be one of them. When I got back to Manaus, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brought something back with me. The silence, the smell, the memory of those bare footprints in the mud circling my tent. I've gone camping again since then, but never anywhere near a jungle. Every now and then, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and feel that same silence pressing against my ears, the same stillness I felt in the Amazon. And every time, I find myself listening for those slow, careful footsteps outside the tent. It was the summer of 2016, and I had been backpacking through Europe alone after finishing college. I had already spent 2 weeks in Germany and Switzerland before heading into southern France. I didn't have much money left, so instead of staying in hotels or hostels, I decided to camp out most nights. It felt freeing, cheap, quiet, and peaceful. I liked the idea of sleeping under the open sky in places that didn't even show up on maps. I remember it was somewhere near the Cévennes region in the south. The area was covered in thick woods and uneven hills. I had found an old hiking trail that wasn't being used much anymore. There were no lights, no towns nearby, just endless trees, dry grass, and the sound of insects echoing through the night. That day had been hot, around 32 degrees Celsius, and by the time I found a flat spot to pitch my tent, I was soaked in sweat and exhausted. I set up camp on a small clearing beside a narrow dirt path, probably once used by farmers decades ago. The spot wasn't perfect. It was surrounded by tall grass and dead branches that cracked when I stepped on them. But it was isolated, and I liked that. I cooked some noodles on my small gas stove and ate sitting on a rock, listening to the faint rustling in the trees. The air smelled dry, like dust and pine. Around 8 p.m., the light began to fade, and a deep orange glow painted the tops of the trees. I stayed up for a while, scrolling through my phone, watching the battery slowly drain while the sky turned dark. The nearest town was about 10 kilometers away, and I hadn't seen a single car or person since early afternoon. That thought was comforting at first. It felt like I was in my own quiet world. But when darkness finally swallowed everything around me, the silence became heavy. I could hear every little thing. The wind, the crunch of leaves far away, the occasional snap of a twig. I remember hearing the first sound around 10 p.m. It wasn't close, but it was clear. A steady crunch, like footsteps moving over dry leaves. I froze inside my tent, holding my breath, trying to tell if it was an animal or something else. The steps were slow, not hurried or random like an animal's movements. They sounded cautious, deliberate. They stopped for a few seconds, then continued. At first, I told myself it was just a deer or a boar, but the sound went on for several minutes, always at the same pace, always stopping and starting again. It was coming from the same side of the path I had walked up from earlier that day. I didn't move. I sat still, staring at the thin fabric of my tent glowing faintly from my lantern inside. I could see vague shadows moving on the outside, branches swaying, insects flying by, but nothing that looked like a person. After about 10 minutes, the sound stopped completely. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Tense, like something was waiting. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I zipped my sleeping bag up to my neck, turned off the lantern, and lay still, staring at the faint outline of the tent ceiling above me. I didn't fall asleep for a long time. Every sound made me flinch, the faint hoot of an owl, the scratching of leaves. When I finally did drift off, it must have been close to midnight. But at some point, I woke up again. I didn't know what time it was, but the air inside the tent felt colder, and I noticed something strange immediately. The smell. It was faint at first, like old metal or sweat, but strong enough to make me uneasy. I lifted my head slightly and realized I could hear breathing, slow, uneven breathing, coming from outside my tent. I stayed completely still. The sound was close, maybe 2 or 3 meters away. It wasn't heavy like a large animal. It sounded human. My chest tightened as I tried not to make a sound. The breathing continued for several seconds, then stopped. I heard a faint shuffle, and something brushed against the side of the tent. My entire body went numb. The fabric moved slightly, just a soft push from the outside, like someone's hand brushing past it. Then silence again. I remember staring at that spot for what felt like an hour, waiting for it to happen again. But it didn't. Eventually, I heard slow steps moving away through the grass, fading deeper into the woods. I didn't sleep again that night. When the sun finally came up, I got out of the tent, my body stiff and eyes burning from not sleeping. The grass around my campsite was damp with morning dew. I walked a few meters around, looking for tracks, but the ground was dry and hard. Still, I could see where the grass had been pressed down near the side of my tent, like someone had crouched there for a while. I packed my things quickly, feeling uneasy but trying to stay rational. Maybe it had been some hiker who got lost. Maybe a farmer checking something nearby. The thought didn't help much, but I told myself that. I started hiking back down the path toward the main road. After about 2 hours of walking, I came across an old wooden sign half buried in weeds, written in faded French. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The letters were hard to read, but it seemed to mark a closed-off trail that used to connect to a nearby hamlet. I didn't think much of it and kept moving. That night, I decided to stay in a small paid campsite near a village called Saint-André de Valborn. It was quiet, with only 2 other tents set up near the far end of the field. The owner was an older man who barely spoke English, and I was too tired to talk anyway. I set up my tent again, had a quick dinner, and went to sleep early. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again. It was dead silent outside, not even crickets. I thought I'd heard something, maybe a distant rustle, but what caught my eye was the faint glow outside my tent, like someone's flashlight moving in the distance. I unzipped the flap just a bit and looked out. Far away, maybe 50 meters near the tree line, I saw a figure, a man. He was standing still, facing my direction. The beam of a small flashlight in his hand swept slowly over the ground, then lifted toward me. I ducked down immediately, heart racing. I stayed like that for minutes, barely breathing. I could still see the faint light through the tent fabric, moving slowly back and forth. It stayed for a long time before finally fading away. When I finally looked again, the light was gone, but I knew he was there, watching. I didn't wait until morning. I stuffed everything into my backpack, left the tent behind, and started walking toward the village road. I didn't even use my flashlight. I just followed the dirt track until I reached the dim streetlights near the main road. When I got to the small cafe near the bus stop, I sat there until sunrise. A few locals passed by, looking at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I just wanted daylight. Later that morning, I caught a bus to Alesh and then a train north. I didn't go camping again after that. Every time I closed my eyes that night on the train, I kept seeing that faint outline of the man standing in the trees, the slow way he moved, the quiet way he breathed outside my tent. Weeks later, out of curiosity, I looked up the area online. There had been several reports over the years, hikers and campers seeing a strange man wandering near abandoned trails in that same region. Some said he lived alone in the forest. Some said he watched people from a distance but never spoke. No one ever caught him. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I know what I heard that night. The quiet breathing inches from my tent wall, the sound of his steps in the dry grass. And sometimes, even now, when I'm out late and the night feels too quiet, I catch myself holding my breath, waiting for that same slow sound again. I still remember the way the air smelled that evening. Damp pine, smoke from the small fire, and that faint earthy scent you only get when the sun is gone and the soil starts to cool. It was late September of 2019, and I had driven up to northern Montana for a weekend alone in the woods. I had been working long hours at my construction job and just wanted some quiet, away from people, phones, and city lights. I picked a spot near Silver Creek, a place I'd found a few years earlier when hiking with some friends. It wasn't an official campsite. It was just a small clearing near the water, surrounded by thick trees. There were no signs, no trash bins, and no other people. That's what I liked about it. You could sit there and hear nothing but wind, water, and your own breath. I parked my truck about half a mile away where the dirt road ended and hiked in with my gear. The walk wasn't bad, though the trail was muddy from rain earlier that week. My boots sank into the ground with every step, making that slow, sucking sound that always reminded me of something struggling to breathe. The sun was already low, and I wanted to get the tent up before it got dark. By the time I got everything set, it was almost night. The fire was small but steady, I cooked some canned chili on the little camp stove, ate straight from the pot, and then sat back listening to the creek. The water moved fast that night. It had rained hard the day before, and the current sounded stronger than usual. After a while, I noticed how dark it had gotten. The woods around me felt heavier somehow, thicker. I tried to relax, telling myself it was just the usual feeling of being alone out there. You hear every twig crack, every gust of wind feels like footsteps, and you start making up things in your head. Still, there was something about that night that didn't sit right with me. It was the silence between sounds. The wind would stop all at once, and the woods would go completely quiet. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. It was like everything out there was listening. I didn't think much of it and went to bed early. The tent was small, barely big enough for me and my sleeping bag. I lay there for a while listening to the creek and the faint crackling of the fire dying outside. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up maybe an hour later. I wasn't sure what time it was, but the fire outside had gone completely out, and everything was pitch dark. What woke me was a sound, not loud, but clear enough to cut through the quiet. It was the sound of something snapping a branch nearby. Not a dry twig, but a heavier branch, like someone stepped on it. My first thought was a deer. They were common around there. But then I heard another sound. Slow footsteps. Not running, not rushing. Just steady, deliberate steps moving somewhere near my tent. I could feel my pulse thumping in my ears. I tried to stay still, breathing as quietly as I could. The steps stopped for a while, and then I heard something brushing against the side of the tent. A slow drag, like a hand or maybe a piece of clothing. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. After maybe 30 seconds, it stopped. Then silence again. I waited, counting in my head, trying to decide if I should grab my flashlight or just stay down. I finally reached for it, careful not to make any noise. When I clicked it on, I pointed it toward the thin fabric of the tent. Nothing moved outside. I couldn't hear anything either. I sat there for probably 10 minutes, lights still on, listening. Eventually, I unzipped the tent and pointed the beam outside. The fire pit was cold, the clearing empty. The woods looked normal, the creek still running. I walked a small circle around the tent, scanning the ground. That's when I saw it, a boot print. Clear as day in the wet dirt, right near where I had stored my cooler and backpack. It wasn't mine. It was bigger and fresher, pressed deeper into the mud. I froze there for a long minute. I looked around again, shining the light between the trees, but there was nothing. No more sounds. I went back into the tent, zipped it up, and sat with my flashlight still in my hand. I didn't sleep much after that. When morning came, I checked again. The boot print was still there, along with another faint one leading toward the edge of the creek. It looked like whoever it was had come from the direction of the old forest road that ran parallel to the stream about a quarter-mile away. There were faint tracks leading back that way too. I told myself maybe it was some hunter or hiker who had just wandered close without meaning to. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. No one walks that close to someone's tent in the middle of the night unless they're trying to. I packed up my gear earlier than planned that morning. But before leaving, I decided to take a quick look around the area, just to see if there was anyone else camping nearby. I followed the faint path that led along the creek for a bit. After about 10 minutes, I came across an old fire ring made from stones. It looked like it hadn't been used in a long time, but there was a pile of trash next to it. Torn up plastic bags, empty cans, and what looked like an old sleeping bag half buried under leaves. The weird part was that the sleeping bag wasn't torn by animals. It was cut clean open with something sharp. The zipper was sliced down the middle. I didn't touch it, just looked at it for a second and turned back toward my camp. As I was walking back, I noticed something else that made my stomach twist. There were small bits of white cloth stuck on a low branch near my tent. It looked like part of a shirt sleeve, and near it, another partial footprint, deeper this time, pointed in the direction of where I'd been sleeping. Whoever had come by that night had stopped right next to me. I left right after that. I didn't eat breakfast, didn't even bother cleaning the area properly like I usually do. I just grabbed everything, stuffed it in the truck, and got out of there as fast as I could. About 2 miles down the dirt road, I saw something in the distance. An old blue pickup truck parked off to the side. It looked beat up, the paint peeling, one window covered with duct tape. There was no one inside, but on the dashboard I saw a folded map. The same area I had camped in was circled with red marker. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. The entire way home, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight they hurt. A week later, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I called the local ranger station. I told them roughly where I had camped and what I'd found. The guy I talked to sounded serious. He told me they'd send someone to check it out. About 2 days later, he called me back. He said they did find signs of someone camping there recently, including some trash and an old sleeping bag, but nothing that pointed to anything criminal. Then he mentioned something that made my skin crawl. He said they had found that old blue truck abandoned near the same dirt road, just a few miles from my campsite. No license plate, no registration. Looked like it had been there for a while. I didn't go back there again. Every time I think about that night, I remember the slow sound of footsteps outside my tent, that dragging noise against the fabric, and that single, deep footprint in the mud. Whoever it was, they weren't lost and they weren't just passing through. They came right up to me, stood there, and for some reason, decided to leave. Sometimes, when I camp in safer, busier places now, I still wake up at night and listen. I lie there, waiting for that sound again. That slow, careful step in the dark, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened the tent sooner, or if they hadn't decided to walk away. That thought has never really left me, and maybe that's why I don't camp alone anymore. It was late September of 2018 when I decided to take my dog, Cooper, on a short camping trip. I was 28 then, living in Oregon, working a desk job that kept me cooped up most of the week. The idea of a quiet weekend in the woods felt like the reset I needed. I'd been to a few state parks before, but this time I wanted somewhere quieter, a bit off the grid. I found a place called Pine Hollow Ridge, about 3 hours from Portland. It wasn't an official campground, just a stretch of national forest with a dirt access road that led to a small clearing beside a creek. I packed light tent, sleeping bag, food, a small stove, flashlight, knife, extra batteries, and a can of bear spray. I didn't expect much trouble. Cooper was a 2-year-old black lab mix, big, friendly, and protective when he needed to be. He always seemed aware of things before I was, which made me feel safer being alone. By the time I reached Pine Hollow, it was late afternoon. The sun was sliding down behind the trees, making the forest glow in that deep orange light that only happens in autumn. I parked off the dirt path and carried my stuff down a narrow trail that opened into a small flat area. It was perfect, quiet, shaded, with just enough space for the tent. The air smelled like wet pine and cold water. The creek was only 20 feet away, slow moving but constant, making that low rushing sound that somehow makes the silence deeper. Setting up took maybe half an hour. I built a small fire pit out of rocks and gathered some dry branches nearby. Cooper wandered around sniffing everything, his tail wagging, ears flicking at every sound. Once the tent was up and the fire was going, I sat back on a folding chair with a can of beer and watched the light fade out. There was something calming about it. Just the fire crackling, the smell of smoke, and the forest settling in for the night. But the peace didn't last long. Around 9, when the fire had died down to a soft orange glow, Cooper suddenly lifted his head and stared toward the dark line of trees across the creek. His ears went stiff and his whole body froze. I didn't hear anything at first, just the usual sounds: water, insects, the occasional rustle of wind through branches. But the way Cooper was locked on, silent and tense, made me uneasy. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the opposite bank. The beam hit nothing but trees and underbrush. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon, something harmless. Still, Cooper didn't move. His tail went low, and he let out this deep, low growl, one I'd only heard a few times before, usually when a stranger came up to my house at night. I stood there for a long minute, scanning the woods, but saw nothing. Then the sound came, faint but clear. Branches breaking, slow, deliberate steps. Not quick, not scattered like an animal running, slow, heavy crunches through wet ground. Then silence again. Cooper barked once, loud and sharp. The sound echoed through the trees. I kept my flashlight pointed that way, but after a few seconds, everything went still again. No more breaking branches, just the creek. Eventually, I sat back down, trying to shake it off. Maybe someone else was camping nearby, though I hadn't seen another car for miles. Maybe they were just walking around in the dark for some reason. I didn't like it, but I didn't feel in danger, not yet. I fed the fire again and sat close to it, watching the flames climb higher. Cooper stayed near my feet, restless. I could tell he didn't trust the quiet. Every few minutes he'd glance toward the creek. I started to feel it too. That prickling at the back of your neck when you know you're not as alone as you thought. It began to rain around midnight, soft at first, then steady. The fire hissed and faded down to a red glow. I crawled into the tent, zipped it up, and lay in my sleeping bag. Cooper came in and curled up beside me, damp and breathing slow. The sound of the rain on the tent was steady, rhythmic, almost enough to drown out my unease. But every now and then, I thought I heard something mixed in, a sound that didn't belong. Once, it was what sounded like 2 slow footsteps near the tent. I froze, barely breathing, listening. The rain masked everything, but I could have sworn I heard the squish of boots on wet dirt. Then nothing. I stayed like that for what felt like half an hour before sleep finally took over. I woke up at around 3:40 in the morning. Cooper was sitting upright, pressed against the tent wall, staring at the back corner. His ears were pinned forward, and I could feel the vibration of a low growl in his chest. My heart started hammering. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the forest was dead quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. Then came the sound again, the crunch of something stepping just outside the tent. One step, then another, slow, heavy, the kind of movement that means whoever's out there is trying not to make noise but failing. I grabbed the flashlight and flicked it on, shining it at the thin nylon wall. I couldn't see a shape, but I saw the faint shadow of something tall moving past. Cooper barked loud and lunged toward the sound, hitting the tent wall. The shadow shifted fast, followed by running footsteps retreating into the trees. My pulse was pounding. I unzipped the tent halfway, shined the light out. Nothing but rain-soaked grass and darkness. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching the flashlight and knife, listening to every drip, every shift of the wind. Cooper didn't settle down either. He stayed alert until dawn, eyes always pointed toward the woods. When morning came, everything looked different. The sunlight broke through wet branches, steam rising from the ground. But something felt wrong. When I stepped outside, I noticed fresh footprints in the mud, boot prints. They weren't mine. They circled halfway around my tent, stopping right near the back corner where Cooper had been staring. The prints were large, probably a man's. They led toward the trees and disappeared into the underbrush. That confirmed everything I'd feared. Someone had been out there, watching, moving close to the tent in the middle of the night. I checked my gear, nothing was stolen, but I didn't care. My stomach twisted at the thought of waking up to that sound again. I packed fast, shoving everything into the trunk without bothering to clean up the site. Cooper wouldn't stop pacing, growling low whenever I turned my back to the woods. As I drove down that dirt road, every turn made me check the mirrors. I half expected to see someone standing there watching me leave. When I got back to cell service, I pulled over and reported it to the local ranger station. They said they'd send someone to check the area, though they sounded more annoyed than concerned. Maybe people camp there all the time. Maybe weird things happen and no one says much. I didn't go camping again for over a year after that. Even now, when it rains at night and I hear the slow drip outside my window, it takes me back to that moment. Lying in the dark, my dog growling beside me, the soft crunch of footsteps just beyond thin nylon. What unsettles me most isn't what I heard. It's what I never saw. Whoever it was didn't try to steal anything. They didn't make noise to scare me. They just stood there, quiet, patient, close enough to touch the tent wall. Sometimes I wonder how long they had been standing there before Cooper woke me up. I went camping alone once in the summer of 2014. I was 28 then, living in northern Colorado. I had been working long hours at a construction site and needed a few quiet days away from noise, people, and the same routine. I wanted a place far from crowds, so I looked up some small camping spots that weren't too popular. I found a stretch of forest near Red Feather Lakes, about 2 hours from my apartment. It wasn't an official campsite, just open land with some dirt paths, pine trees, and a small stream that ran through it. I packed light, just a tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a flashlight, and a small camping stove. I left early in the morning, driving down the highway while the sky was still pale. When I turned off onto the dirt road that led into the woods, there was no one around, not a single car in sight. The air was dry and smelled like pine and dust. Felt peaceful. After parking near a clearing, I walked a few hundred feet into the trees to find a flat spot for my tent. The ground was soft and covered in old pine needles. It was quiet except for the faint sound of the wind pushing through branches and the occasional bird. I set up my tent, unpacked my things, and took a walk to explore the area. The stream was maybe 10 minutes from my camp, narrow but clean. I filled my bottle there, sat for a while, and just listened to the running water. Felt good to be away from everything. As the day went on, I gathered some sticks and rocks to make a small fire pit. I cooked a simple dinner, beans and rice from a small tin, and sat near the fire until the sky turned dark blue. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. I remember wrapping my jacket tight around me and staring at the fire, hearing only the soft cracking of wood. It was the kind of silence that almost makes your ears ring. Around midnight, I crawled into my tent and fell asleep to the faint rustling of the trees. Sometime during the night, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know what time it was, but the fire had burned out and everything was dark. The woods were silent, too silent. I couldn't even hear the wind anymore. Then I noticed it. A faint crunch of leaves, slow and steady, coming from somewhere behind my tent. My first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon. I lay completely still, listening. The steps stopped for a few seconds, then started again, a little closer this time. The sound circled around the tent slowly, crunching through dry needles and small twigs. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. My flashlight was near my head, but I didn't want to move to grab it. The steps stopped again, this time near the front of the tent, and I could hear faint breathing. That low, uneven kind of breathing a person makes when they've been walking quietly for a while. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't move. I just listened. After what felt like minutes, the sound faded. The breathing stopped, and the forest went completely still again. I stayed awake for hours, too scared to even unzip the tent. I waited until the faint light of morning started to come through the fabric before finally stepping outside. The air was cold and still. I checked around the tent. No footprints I could see clearly, but the ground near the trees looked disturbed, like someone had walked there. Could have been an animal, I told myself. I wanted to believe that. I tried to shake it off. Made coffee, ate breakfast, and decided to take a hike to clear my head. I followed the stream for a while, maybe a mile or two. It was a nice walk, quiet, calm. But the whole time, I couldn't stop feeling like something was off. I didn't see anyone, but every now and then I'd hear what sounded like a branch snapping behind me, or something moving in the brush just out of sight. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked, it started again. At one point, I found a small patch of flattened grass near a tree, like someone had been lying there. There was a half-burned cigarette butt next to it. It looked recent. The paper was barely darkened by rain or dirt. I didn't smoke, and I hadn't seen anyone since I got there. That made my stomach twist a little. I went back to camp faster than I'd meant to, trying not to look behind me. When I got back, everything looked the same except for one thing. My backpack was unzipped. I knew for sure I'd closed it before leaving. Nothing was missing, but someone had clearly gone through it. My flashlight was lying next to it, turned off. I picked it up and noticed it was slightly damp, like it had been in someone's hand. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone out there. Someone had been near my camp during the night, and they'd come back while I was gone. I decided I'd leave the next morning, first thing. I tried to stay calm, cooked an early dinner, and made a small fire again. But when darkness fell, the woods felt different, heavier somehow. Every sound made me jump. I didn't sleep much that night. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I heard it again. Those same slow footsteps, crunching through the needles. This time I sat up, flashlight in my hand. The steps came closer, and I shined the light toward the sound. For a second, I thought I saw something move between the trees. A dark shape, upright, not an animal. It froze when the light hit it, then moved quickly out of view. I didn't wait to find out more. I stayed awake, flashlight in hand, until dawn. As soon as the sky turned gray, I packed everything. I didn't even bother making breakfast. I just wanted to get out of there. When I started walking back to my car, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. About 50 feet from where I'd camped, behind some thick brush, was an old campfire ring. Ash, empty cans, and a few footprints in the dirt. But what scared me most was a small piece of cloth tied to a tree branch above it. It was red and looked like it had been torn from a shirt. I didn't recognize it, but the cigarette butts were the same brand as the one I'd seen earlier. Someone had been living out there, watching, maybe following anyone who came near. When I finally reached my car, I threw everything into the back and started driving. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The dirt road felt longer than before. When I reached the highway, I didn't stop until I got home. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak or footstep outside my window made me jump. I kept thinking about that night. The breathing outside the tent, the disturbed ground, the backpack, the shadow in the trees. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't my imagination. About a month later, I read an article online about a missing hiker not far from that area. The article mentioned that campers sometimes reported seeing a man living deep in those woods, avoiding people, moving camps every few days. No one knew who he was or how long he'd been there. I never went camping alone again after that. I still have the same tent, but it stays in my closet. Every time I see it, I remember the sound of those slow, careful footsteps circling me in the dark, and I wonder if he was out there that whole time, just waiting, watching me through the thin fabric of my tent. It was late October 2016. I had been driving across northern Spain, trying to escape the noise of everything back home. I wanted to disappear for a while, to be somewhere quiet, away from people, away from the endless routine that had started to feel like a cage. I didn't plan much. I just loaded my car with a small tent, some camping gear, and enough food for a few days. I wanted to find a place deep enough into the woods that I wouldn't hear a single car or voice for days. I found a spot near a small lake outside a forgotten little town called Villarejo. The locals had told me it was empty most of the year and that people didn't really go there since the road leading up was rough and half the time washed out by rain. That was exactly what I wanted. Peace and space. It was supposed to be just me, the woods, and the sound of rain against the tent. The first day went fine. I arrived around noon, set up my tent beside the lake, and gathered some wood for a fire. The place felt untouched. The trees were tall and thick, their branches heavy with moisture. The air smelled like pine and wet soil. I remember sitting by the fire, watching the reflection of the orange flames move across the water. Everything felt calm. By night, the weather shifted fast. The air grew colder, and a thin mist rolled over the lake. I could hear thunder far off, and the sky looked heavy. I didn't mind. I had expected rain. I crawled into my tent around 10, zipped it up, and lay on my sleeping bag with my flashlight beside me. The sound of the rain started softly at first, like a distant static, but soon turned into steady drumming. It was oddly comforting. I woke up sometime after midnight to a noise that didn't fit. It wasn't thunder or rain. It was sharper, something snapping, maybe a branch. I didn't move at first. I just lay there listening. Rain was still falling hard, and the wind pushed against the sides of the tent, making it sway a little. Then I heard another sound, a footstep. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was too heavy, too slow. It came from the direction of the trees, maybe 30 feet from where I was. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a deer or a boar looking for food. But it didn't stop. There was another step, then another. I could tell it was someone or something circling the tent. My heart was beating so loud I could hear it over the rain. I kept still, breathing slow, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. The steps stopped. I waited, frozen. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. Couldn't tell. Then I heard a faint sound, like the metal zipper of my tent brushing slightly. I froze harder. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound didn't come again. Whoever or whatever was out there seemed to stand still for a long time. Eventually, I heard slow, uneven footsteps moving away. They faded into the rain and the distance. I didn't sleep again that night. I just lay there until morning, eyes wide open, flashlight still in my hand. When daylight came, I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped outside. The ground was soaked, covered in mud. The fire pit had turned into a puddle. I walked around the area, looking for footprints. There were some faint but real human footprints, barefoot. They were fresh and half filled with water, leading from the woods toward my tent, then back again. It made my stomach turn. There was no one else supposed to be out here. The nearest house was miles away. I packed my things fast, throwing everything into the car without caring how wet it got. I wanted to leave, but the narrow dirt road leading out had turned into a stream of mud. My car could barely move without sliding. I decided to wait until the rain stopped, hoping it would dry enough by afternoon. Around noon, the rain eased. I walked to the edge of the lake, trying to calm myself. That's when I saw something across the water. A figure standing just beyond the trees, far, maybe 100 meters away. Still, facing the lake, facing me. I couldn't see much detail through the mist and rain, but I could make out that it was a man. He was tall and thin, standing motionless in the open. No cout, no visible gir. Just standing there. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe it was my eyes. But when I looked again, he was gone. That was enough for me. I started my car and forced it through the mud, wheels spinning, the engine whining. I didn't care if I damaged it. I just needed to get out. The tires caught a bit of traction, and I made it onto firmer ground. The whole time I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone walking up behind me through the rain. I made it back to the town by late afternoon. I stopped at a gas station to clean the mud off my boots and grab something to eat. The guy behind the counter looked at me like he had seen this before. Someone shaken, soaked, pale. He didn't say a word, and I didn't offer an explanation. I just wanted to leave, but I couldn't get that image out of my head. The footprints, the way the figure stood by the lake, like he had been watching for a long time. It didn't feel random. I started wondering if maybe someone lived out there, completely off the grid. Someone who didn't like strangers camping on their land. Maybe he had been there the whole night, watching from the woods, waiting to see what I'd do. A few days later, when I was already staying in a small motel 2 towns over, I looked up the area online. I found an old hiking forum where people had talked about that same lake years ago. Most posts were normal, just campers sharing photos. But there was one comment that caught my eye. A man wrote that he had gone there in 2013 and left the same night because he felt like he was being followed. He mentioned hearing footsteps around his tent in the rain. He said he'd seen a man near the water early the next morning, barefoot, staring, not moving. He thought maybe it was someone who lived nearby, but locals told him no one did. That hit me hard. Same place, same story, 3 years apart. I never went back to that part of Spain again. I tried to forget about it, but even now, sometimes when it rains hard at night, I still hear that faint sound of slow footsteps in my head. It's like the memory keeps replaying itself. The smell of wet earth, the cold air pressing against the tent, the soft brush of something outside that wasn't supposed to be there. What stays with me most isn't fear anymore, but the strange certainty that he was real. A real person, someone who walks the woods at night, barefoot, waiting for whoever decides to sleep alone near that lake. I don't know if he was dangerous. Maybe he just watched and moved on. Or maybe the next person who camped there didn't get to leave the same way I did. I'll never know. But every time I think about that night, I feel that same chill run down my spine, like he's still out there, somewhere in the rain, standing just beyond the trees, waiting for the next tent light to flicker through the mist.